Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation now convenes this oversight hearing. The oversight hearing notices were given to the media on Thursday, October 25th. Second notice was on Monday, October 29th. And for the record, today is Thursday, November 1st. And the time now is 9:01. The committee will hear and accept testimony, both oral and written, on the following: the Department of Revenue and Taxation on tax collection, tax enforcement, and tax compliance. The conduct of this oversight shall be as follows. Those testifying will be recognized in the order of the sign-up on the sign-in sheet. Written testimony may be read. Lengthy written testimony should be summarized to about 5 minutes, but I'll allow the department to present all the information that we need today. Please provide our legislative staff with your written testimony for photocopying. Testimony shall be confined to the substance of the oversight. You will be allowed to present your oral testimony only once. Once you're done, you may be asked to remain in the room for question or for additional testimony as may be desired. When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. Please state your name for the record. We'll now begin to hear testimonies from the department from Mr. John Camacho, the director, and I know we'll be getting input from the deputy director, Ms. Benito, and also from the deputy tax commissioner, Mr. Pablo. I'd like to also recognize, joining me today is acting speaker, Senator Therese Terlai. Mr. Camacho, if you will begin, please. I do have a lot of questions I'll ask you, so I'm hoping that you'll answer it with your presentation today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you again for this opportunity to more or less, follow up from our last oversight hearing. We do have a handout that basically we're going to update our presentation to what we did in August and give you more information as far as enforcement, collection, and tax compliance. So with that, joining with me is the Deputy Director, Marie Benito, and of course, our Deputy Tax Commissioner, Paul Pablo. So I would basically go over the presentation, the handout, and I hope you have a copy of the handout. And if we can go through it, then start asking questions, or do you want to go?
Please do your whole presentation, and
then we ask the questions.
Hopefully you would answer all the questions before we even ask it. Thank you.
So why don't we get started? And I guess we normally start with, where actually everything begins in tax, is where basically that is the tax service. So we just updated our data in our income tax returns filed for the 1040 series, 1040A, 1041, 1065, 1120. And one of the things that we want to basically say here is that we are, throughout the years, we've been working to try and get an online e-filing for 1040s, and hopefully in the future also for corporate returns, but mainly 1040s. But working with the IRS in all these years, it wasn't really a part where we could secure. But moving forward, we've been really working with OTEC right now to try and get a vendor to come in and actually provide that access or for online filing or e-filing. So you can imagine how many returns we process every year by just looking at the numbers. We're averaging like 70,000 every year that we process every year. So except we have that 1040 easy that we have every year, that at least 1,000 basically people filed every year and utilize that e-filing. So going along on the other page, we have the electronic filing for all the tax service section, which we talk about that GRT, SWICA, 1040 Easy, W-2. These are all basically that are afforded to the taxpayers of Guam to file electronically. And then I know in the past several years we talk about the availability of all the businesses to have them mandatorily file GRT returns. on a monthly basis. So hopefully that bill that we talk about, we had a public hearing, hopefully we'll move, in a smoothly manner. But that would basically really help our staff at the GRT section. As you know, there's quite a few number of returns that are being processed every month. But that's something that we want to push forward, and hopefully that we can secure that mandatory GRT filing for all businesses. Moving along, we have the refunds paid, by fiscal year. As you know, we have in the 2018, which we just closed recently, it's about 128,267,000. So we don't have the FY19, but I looked at the number where for FY19, it's basically 6.2 million so far of refunds paid. Examination branch, which is we're now getting into the enforcement section. I just want to really emphasize this branch because this really reflects a lot on the accounts receivables. As you notice, the net production that basically is produced by this branch, if you notice, it's in 2015 it's 20.8, and 2016 8.9, then up again to 20.6 million, and just recently this 2018 is 13.2 million. But a lot of aggressive, we really go out aggressively and look at these returns, and we audit these returns, whether it's an EITC return or a corporate return or any industry that we looked at. So I really wanted to say, because this branch really reflects a lot on the receivable. As you know, a lot of them, when it's closed at the examination branch and a proposed deficiency is recommended, normally taxpayers would appeal and would not agree with our department, and then they take us to court. So, for example, we have one big case right now in court of $23 million. We have another $3 million. So those are the things that, it's held up. We can't really collect unless we resolve, or a judgment has been issued. So I want to look at this branch and look at the number of cases that are actually closed. If you look at FY17, they closed 113 corporations, 1,751 individuals, and likewise in 18, 32 corporations, which includes partnership and trust, and also individuals of 1,548 individuals.
Mr. Camacho, can we go by page, because okay, you're in tax enforcement examination branch, correct?
Yes.
And it identified the cases closed, net production, the agents and stuff like that. Can we go back to that? And because we're trying to follow you as okay, now I see where you're at. It's further down.
Further down, yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So basically, the net production is basically what we usually produce, the taxes that we get. We just take our deficiencies and over assessments, and we have our net production, meaning this is additional revenue that was never reported, to the government of Guam. So this is a lot of money, and a lot of the big cases, although we have a lot of agreed cases, but most of the huge or large cases end up in court. So that's something that I mentioned earlier. Moving along to the next page, I guess, we are very aggressive, and for this last several years, or last 8 years, we really went out and looked at the tax for the criminal aspect of the, not the civil, but the criminal aspect of the income tax on GRT. So if you look at the numbers, and we've been basically really referring since 2014 cases to the AG's office for prosecution, and if you look at the numbers, one in 14, one in 15, two in 16, and one in 17 and 18. So, as you know, you've probably seen it on TV or the newspaper that we were successful in that referrals. So we've been very aggressive in that aspect, and we taken a lot of cases, but some cases that if they're not pursued criminally, they're referred back to be on a criminal basis. I mean, on a civil basis, excuse me. So they can't take it, they won't pursue it criminally, then they refer it back to audit, which is the recent one that I talk about for civil cases.
Okay, Mr. Camacho, I just want to make sure that my colleagues here and the people of Guam understand that when it comes to criminal investigation, it's a 6-year span of the investigation that can look into it. And the people of Guam and my colleagues need to understand that the department or the agents have to prove willful intent. That's number one. It's not the same as a police officer where you have reasonable cause to arrest. This one have to prove willful intent, and the case, when it's being developed, it's actually, once the case is completed, it's like a silver platter to the Attorney General's office for prosecution. It's actually all the issues, the points of law, and the criminal intent is established, where when there is prosecution, it's from the day one to the last day, it's guaranteed. But at the same token, the people of Guam have to understand, when it goes to criminal, there's no money in the government. It's only when it's civil, when there's fines that the courts will levy. Other than that, is you go to jail, you serve your time, unless the courts determines there's restitution required and stuff like that. Otherwise, it becomes zero. So it's all for prosecution, and that's my understanding, and I think that's pretty clear. Unless the courts determines you're going to pay a fine, you're going to pay restitution. Other than that, it just prosecuted, goodbye. Am I correct, Ms. Benito? If you can explain a little bit more of that, because I want to make sure the people of Guam and my colleagues understand what goes on the criminal side. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You're correct to a point. These are complicated. When you have a tax case, willful intent is the hardest thing to prove in a court of law. So when we do a case, it normally takes between 6 months, a year, 2 years sometimes. It depends on the complexity of the case. And what happens is when we start a case, by the time we're completed, a case is completed, it's ready for referral, ready for courts. So it should be prosecution ready. So they don't have to do anything at the AG or the district court. It should be ready for prosecution. And then as far as the taxes are being paid. There is incarceration and restitution, and that's to pay the taxes and interest and penalties that are included.
All right, thank you. Mr. Camacho, please continue on.
All right. Yeah, moving along, now we're getting into the collection aspect of the enforcement section, and last time I basically last time we basically looked at the aging of the accounts receivable and the number of counts and the amount by year. And if you look at the aging, the first 5 years are kind of within that. In other words, they're more like consistent. In other words, and then further down, it gets harder. And I can explain that later when we talk about collections. But this is really the aging of the accounts receivable. Accounts receivables is a revolving account. Every month we get referrals from the accounting branch for people that didn't pay, taxpayers that didn't pay their taxes. So it comes in and it goes out, in other words. So this is the aging of the accounts receivable. This is something that we really wanted to include. Last time we only had 15, 16, and 17 for the fiscal year. And now we have 18, which is pretty big. But one of the reasons why is to the aggressive collection of the accounts receivable together basically with the tax amnesty that we I guess we offered in May through September. So from 15, 16, and 17, you can see that the average monthly collection is around $2 to $3 million, and in FY 18, we were averaging about $5.4 million. So this is the thing that we're basically looking at, and this year we actually really went out and started collecting, aggressively collecting more on those receivables. And then if you look at the falling rate, and I can go back to that monthly collection rate again, this time we wanted to include the collection rate, and in FY 16, we basically have 26% of the receivables that we collected for income tax. In 2017, it's 21%, and in 2018 is 37%. One of the reasons why we segregated the income tax and BPT, because we wanted to compare the federal rate to our rate, our collection rate, and the federal rate basically is, I think for the last several years, is at 28% collection rate. And what the collection rate is basically is we look at the total receivable for the fiscal year, and basically divide that by take the number of payments that were taken in, divided by that amount, and we get the rate. So this FY18 is pretty high. It's at 37%. For the BPT, we're at 14%. In 16, 17, it's 11%, and in 18 at 19%. So this is the collection rate that we have. Now we're getting into the tax amnesty, and I know we've been communicating with some of the staff here at the legislature, and basically what was declared for the entire program was 35.2 million. We collected 30.1, and 5.1 was the balance was not paid. And for those taxpayers that didn't fully pay their tax, then they're out of the amnesty, and which gives us an 85% rate of collection. And if you can look at the type, income tax, BPT, and we have some use tax, hotel occupancy tax, limited gaming tax, and real property tax. So those are the numbers that we have that I've been updating for the last several months. Then I know last time I did say that we'll look at the penalties and interest, how much we're giving up. And the next slide talks about the penalty and interest abatement as of October 23rd. As you can see that of the 125 applicants or taxpayers that paid $1 million, we abated so far $978,000, and on penalty, and on interest we abated $458,923.80. So if you look at the amount of penalty and interest that we abated on this $1 million that we collected, is more than 100%, a little bit over 100%. So when we look at the remaining taxpayers or the applicants that we have about 1,000, I think 1,002 or so, we're gonna basically probably match or close to match the tax collected and the penalties and interest waived. I think we looked at half of the taxpayers that, and I think it was at 80 and 90% already. So in a $15 million collection, we're probably looking at abating, 13 to 14 million of interest and penalties. And again, I say this because if the receivable that they're paying is the further back it goes, the more interest. It's compounded daily. So we see a lot of these taxes that are paid way back in 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years ago, taxes that are old that long, and they come up and pay. So basically, again, they're gonna, we're gonna have to abate those interests. When it comes to delinquent returns or unfiled returns, again, you're looking at two types of penalties. It's failure to file, which is the view up to 25% of that. It will be penalized based on tax, and also the failure to pay penalty and interest. So it's even going to be a little bit more severe on the delinquent, because we're not only waiving failure to pay, but we're also waiving failure to file. So that, our estimation of the abatement of interest and penalties as a result of this tax amnesty program, we're looking at close to matching the tax collected interest and penalties to be abated. So I think one of my staff or administrators looked at it, and it's going to be close at the end when we actually finish all these abatements. These taxpayers that actually complied and paid their taxes is going to be close to 30 million, or even a little bit more.
So you're saying you collected 30 million in tax amnesty?
Yes.
But you abated 30 million?
No. So far, this report...
Of the 30 million collected on the amnesty, how much was abated?
So far, if you look at the report,
right, it's $1 million.
We on 125 taxpayers that paid 1 million. Some of them have small amounts, right? So we abated already $636,978.72 for penalty.
Correct.
And then for interest, we abated $458,923.80. If you add those two up, it's a little bit more than what taxes was collected. So that's the rate that we're looking at.
But of the 30 million collected, how much was abated on penalty and interest? That's what we need to know.
That's so far in the report I'm showing you.
Of only 1 million?
No. So far, Senator, of the 125 taxpayers.
Right. Understand that. I'm just saying is
that's abated already.
Okay. No, but you have 30 million you collected. Remember, I'm looking at the slide before that. You have 30 million collected. Estimated was 35. You got 30. How much did the government lose from interest and penalties? That's just the numbers we need to know. And the reason why is because for future recommendation of the body would be, do we want to even entertain any more tax amnesty versus making sure that the tools are provided and the resources to the department to aggressively go after them and say, no more waiver, you start paying because you need to be up to date, or your business closes. I mean, that's just the process. I just need to know that.
Hi, Senator, if I can add to
yes, please.
What the director is saying. If you look at what's given to you, the amounts here that are shown as the abatements are those that have been processed. But you're absolutely correct. You can make the inference that if we collected $1 million and we're abating $1 million, if you apply that same ratio to the 30 million collected in amnesty, you're going to come pretty close to abating almost that same amount, 30 million, or maybe even 80% of that. That's a good inference to make.
Okay, thank you. Please continue. If you can turn on.
Sorry, I turn it off. My apologies.
No problem.
Last time we updated the accounts receivable, and for this accounts receivable that we're presenting today, we're saying that the initial accounts receivable which established in accounting branch is about 2.3 million, and then the second, which is these are not non-referral to collection branch, is about 179,000. And this is really the branch that actually goes out and really enforce collection, is the collection branch, which is, we have about 155,000 that we have for accounts receivable so far. So we want to try and break this thing down and see where we at, what represents this $155,000. So we go to the next file and slide, and basically say that of this 155,000, we're looking at 89.70, which is an active. This is something that we're looking at, and then we have all these special accounts from category B all the way down to category S, go all the way down, which basically represents what the amount of that $155,000. But what we did even further is to say, when we look at this account, we want to make sure that we're going to try and look at what we call residual or good accounts that we want to basically go after. And that is the next slide, when we basically say that of that 89, the active really that we're really looking at is $85.2 million. Bankruptcy is at 8.1. Continuous levy is about 850,000. Delinquent is 565,000. And again, I want to point this out. GIDA, when a taxpayer gets a certificate, basically these are our BPT, we really assess those tax on these GIDA certificate holders. And to such time a certificate of compliance has been issued by GIDA specifying that this particular certificate holder has complied, then we go back and abate this assessment. So this 5.4 is not even unless we don't get a certificate of compliance, which rarely we don't. We normally get a certificate of compliance. And then the inactive, which is very minor. Litigation, which is what I talked about earlier. You know, basically these are cases that develop in examination branch through audit, that they actually don't agree with us, so they take us to court. And then offer and compromise, we got 5.4. When I say offer and compromise, basically this is on the table by the taxpayer, basically saying, you know, I'm making this offer, but I'm gonna basically say, if I owe you, let's say, 100,000, I want to pay it in a year or 2 years. Divide that amount by 2 years. So we agree into that. If we agree to that based on the financial statement, and that's reasonable for us, and we sign that offer and compromise, then that taxpayer is locked into that amount for the next, let's say, next 2 years. And basically saying that also at the same time when we have these things of payment plan is that if the taxpayer default on these things, then everything goes back. And we basically say, hey, you know, your offer was this, but now that you defaulted on your offer, likewise with payment plans, it goes back to the original. And then we go into payment plans, which are $15.2 million. Reactivated is 86,000, and I guess this collection branch, which is about 8,000, which is very minimal. So, you know, when we look at the receivables of 155 million, and we look at this 85 million that we're actively pursuing right now, even with this 85 million, a lot of people are going to come in and say, I can't pay you, so I'm going to go into a payment plan again. And some of them, again, basically say, I disagree with this. I'm going to take you to court. We have a big case in court because taxpayer didn't agree with the collection. So those are things that are very time-consuming, and it extends. I mean, we don't want to talk about current receivable versus long-term receivables here, but if you look at the picture, you know, and say 85 million, we have this amnesty that we basically took in 30 million, you know, and all these things. It takes time. In other words, we're saying we can't go out there and say we want to collect on these things. It takes time. And this all payment plan offer, it's going to add up every time. It's going to continue to add up. And because taxpayers are basically coming in and say, hey, you know, I can't. But if, you know, the good thing about, let me just talk about the amnesty. The amnesty brought in only of that 30 million, 30.1 million, it only brought in 9.7 million on receivables. The 19 million was basically on non-filers, delinquent returns. And the difference is on real property. So it didn't really, and the other thing about the receivable is that the one that didn't really pay was on the receivable, not the delinquent. Because the delinquent people came in and paid the full amount. So these are the things that we're looking, but you know, we got the 30 million. We got the 30 million. That really helped. But you know, like Paul said, and we all agreed that maybe 80, 90%, maybe even 100% of that will be abated, interest and penalties. So when you look at the picture here, and you add all these special classes, it's really looking at so much. You're looking at, if you add these category B all the way down to category X, which you take 85 over 143, that is all basically spoken for. In other words, they're all locked. We don't know when the bankruptcy is going to close, and most bankruptcy is very hard to collect because we're either first, second, third, or not first, second or third on the lien. So those are the things that we're looking at. So, and you know, from this, I would actually basically ask Marie and Paul to add more into these things. So,
thank you, Mr. Director. Yes, I'd like to add also that if you're looking at the 85 active, ready to go out and collect, we have to consider that some of that amount is also interest and penalty that will be abated once the amnesty cases are completed, because they're still reviewing some of the applications. So once that's done, that's going to be reduced. And I'd like to address, you know, there was a statement made that Mr. Camacho was irresponsible with a $77 million collection, or AR, accounts receivable. I'd like to clarify for the record that unlike private industries or banks or other industries out there, we cannot just go out and collect the way we would like to. There are laws, taxpayer is afforded many, many rights that we have to adhere to. So by law, we are being responsible by upholding the law and the procedures. So just for the record, I'd like to say that you can't just go out there and collect as a whole, or just knock on their door and say, give me the money. That's not how it works. We are being responsible. We're following the laws of taxes. So I'd like to remind you that 85 will also be reduced by the amnesty, interest, and penalty, and that we cannot just go out and collect like some people mentioned. Thank you.
Mr. Pablo, who's actually in charge of all the enforcement folks, do you have anything you wanted to add before I ask my colleagues to ask questions? Because we know we do have questions.
Sure, Senator, thank you. You know, first of all, I'd like to thank the legislature for continuously giving our department our support. You know, our enforcement division can't work alone without the service division. So when we look at effective tax administration, we want to look and continue to hope to receive the continued support of the legislature in giving us the resources for both areas. Because even though at the end of the day, most people want to look at what money comes in, we want to make sure that we articulate the laws that are written by the legislature and the changes that come in by Congress, so we can communicate it effectively, teach the taxpayers how their responsibilities to file, and then and collect on them. And I think if we continue that partnership and continue to engage in dialogue that's really effective, I think you can see that, you know, working for DRT, most people that work there often get criticized. It's a very difficult job and a very difficult department. And we often wonder why people want to work there. I ask myself. So thank you very much for understanding and continuing that support.
Thank you, sir. Now I ask my colleagues if they have any. Could I have some questions? But and my questions are actually Mr. Camacho and to all three of you. When I was at the department, we had the compliance task force. Do we have that set up? And I know Paul will probably answer that real quick. And the only reason why is because there are folks out there that are probably doing business again or they haven't got caught. Because when I was there, there was 8 of us, and for 4,000 licensed business, not counting the folks that are not licensed, or the folks that are doing business but are mixing. It's like the vegetable stand. A lot of the people of Guam don't realize that if you set up a vegetable stand, if I'm correct, you don't pay taxes if it's homegrown. It's something you grow out in the farm. But if you add a product that's sold in the store, you're required to be taxed. And I'm just concerned is there a compliance task force start up again? Because I know you only have so many folks. You got to make sure the criminal investigation is doing their job, ABC. But I'm just curious, is there a compliance task force out there going up and knocking on the doors? No different as a lot of people don't realize that if you rent your house, you got to get a business license for that. And I remember knocking on doors and finding out that the owners never knew they needed one. And we had to find them. So I'm just curious, is there a compliance task force out there knocking on doors and visiting everybody, making sure they're licensed?
Yes, you're right. That task force still exists. However, they haven't gone out in a while because of, again, lack of resources. Like you said, there's 3 different divisions that are involved. The ABC, business license, and then the revenue officers. So right now, as it stands, we have new compliance officers. They're still in training, but that program still exists, and we do remind them on other ways as far as letters. So we have the notices of non-renewals going out. We have, when they're going for a business license, they must clear with everybody. Or when we have information, anonymous information, coming in, then we will go and investigate that. So we really encourage, reporting anything that the public sees out there. Anonymously, we'll take it, we'll run with it.
And I'd like to go back to your statement of they're going through training. I think the people of Guam and my colleagues need to understand that when you hire revenue agents, it's not like you walk in, here's a book, go out there and start assessing collection, levies, sees, examination, and so forth, or even criminal, or even the ABC side. I think the people of Guam need to understand that there's, if I'm correct, there's as much as 6 months that there's a training process, and then there's what they call learn from lessons. What was that? On the job training. So if you hire 10 collection agents, that means there's 10 agents that marry up with these new ones, and then they're given the on-the-job. And what is the normal? About 6 months, would I say? Am I correct? It's in that area, Mr. Pablo?
That's correct, Senator. That's a good estimate. But training is not just training the new hires, but it's continuous training, because every year the tax law changes. With the Trump tax changes, I myself probably haven't caught up with all the changes, just to catch up to speed with the law. But I'm glad you bring it up, because most recently our director and deputy have dialogued with IRS, and we're trying to continue getting IRS revenue officer training hopefully within the next coming months. There's been an interest in Guam being, one of the insular areas or the territories that kind of home-based training. So we take some of the agents from American Samoa, the VI, CNMI, and we use Guam as the training hub whenever we try to dialogue with IRS. But it's not just there, like you said. It's not just revenue officers, the tax investigators, the revenue agents. It even goes to the service side of the house to make sure we're telling taxpayers correctly how to file. And most especially with the upcoming new year in 2018, there's going to be a big change that everyone is going to be probably a little bit surprised. You're going to see a small tax return, and it's because the Trump tax changes required that they simplify the return. But really what it is a condensed form of a tax return that still has a lot of the same schedules and a lot of the same computations, but it did take away like the standard deduction and the exemptions. They're minor things that not only do our service personnel have to engage themselves in understanding, but communicating it effectively to the public so that, there's not a lot of confusion. And at that same time, we're still trying to incorporate how we're going to develop e-filing, just like we did with the 1040 EZs, to accommodate and make it a lot easier for the public to file too.
Okay, and on that same note, in the collection branch, how many folks have you hired from our last fiscal year when we were able to get you money? And I know that you had problems getting DOE to release it or BBMR to get you to allow you folks to hire, but how many have you hired? And I'm looking at the overall picture, is that I'm concerned about when you hired folks, we were also looking at the tobacco stamp. We're
Yes.
looking at the short-term rental. We're looking at the bed and breakfast. We're looking at a lot of stuff, a lot of laws that were passed, and we're just concerned is that where are we at, and are we collecting anything, or is there something? Is there notice going out there? Is there public what's that they call the public service announcement, letting people know that if you don't come in and sign up for your short-term rental, when we knock on your door, it's too late. You know, the message got to come out that you give them warning. It's like what the AG puts out, those public service announcement. If you don't do it, by the time you get to them, it shouldn't matter. You're going to be fined and so forth. That's what we need to know.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Chair. So we have hired since then, as per the law, an additional 8 revenue officers, additional 5 revenue agents, 4 compliance inspectors, 1 compliance inspector 2, 2 tax investigator 1s, 4 registration officers, vehicle registration officer, and we're in the process right now of completing the driver's license examiner.
Ms. Benito, is it possible for you to give us that listing and just provide it to the chair so we can share it with all of the members of the committee? Because that's
Sure.
very helpful. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Now, when were they all hired? Just so we can know the time period.
Over the last few months, they've been hired.
Okay, before October started. In other words,
Yes,
it wasn't
yes,
October.
correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure because, you know, there was money and the next fiscal year is a different ball game.
But
You'd
they're
have to do
still,
it.
they're still in the budget, so we have those positions on the budget for hiring, so.
Okay.
As far as, thanks.
Let me see. I'm going to ask, and where are we at on their, you know, there was commotion on the real property issue, and I think that has been settled, right? You
Okay,
need
I
to
like-
enforce it, and I'm only concerned that we need an answer to that because that's $8 million, and it will impact revenue and taxes budget. So it's almost like beneficial if you pursue it, but Mr. Pablo, if you can please explain that to us.
Thank you, Senator, for asking that question. And that'll lead me to a couple concerns I kind of wanted to end it with. But, you know, with the real property tax legislation that took effect in the budget law, revenue tax has never been against any type of legislation that would generate revenue for the government, especially to the TEF. That goes to education. We fully understand that. But you know, one thing we've always done when we've done our tax administration is we look at the language of the law, and that's very important. And that's one thing I'd like to ask in any future legislations that are passed is we recognize during that budget hearing a lot of things were rushed, but one of the first things that we found, and even while we're looking at the programming, is the language itself says the rate will change for those improvements that are valued at $1 million, period. It doesn't say at least 1 million or more. And so we sat down and we said, how do we approach this? Do we look at only properties that are valued at 1 million? Or do we look at taxing a property that's valued at 1.5, tax that at the $1 million at the new rate, and the 500,000 reverting back to the old rate? And again, we know the full intent that the legislature had, but the reason why we were coming up with this is we're having our programmers make that change. And we've spoke to the AG's office, and we fully understand the intent of the law, but whenever we, come into a conflict with a taxpayer who wants to take us to court, we've always used tax administration, and especially with income tax, the language of the law is really the technicality that makes the decision whether we prevail or not in tax court. Now, I guess in local court and looking at the Guam Code, there are probably some differences in how the law can be interpreted. And every time we get an AG opinion, it is an opinion. And sometimes we don't agree with it, but for the most part, we want to administer the law so that we don't hamper any part of the fiscal operations that are intended. But again, when we come back and we sit down with a taxpayer who says, wait a minute, this law happened, we recognize the effective date was August when it lapsed into law. You didn't give me the opportunity when the other parameters of the law that required, for example, the assessment date is the first Monday in March. So that's long gone. By March, we should have had in our books, accounting-wise, what the role was. The law didn't lapse until August, I believe, 24th. So again, do we run into another issue now? Do we prorate this amount? And I guess to the general public, again, revenue tax is the bad department. We refuse to uphold the law, which is really, honestly, we're protecting the public's interest because $1 million or $100,000 is immaterial to us. But the language is very important. And, you know, I know I've talked to my bosses, they've talked to the fiscal team, and I guess in the heat of getting a budget that everybody could agree to so we wouldn't shut the government down, maybe some of those things were overlooked. But we're just hoping in the future that any time something comes out, we hope that it's language specifically so that we don't run into any issues. That's the challenge we're actually having now, Senator. So we did receive the AG's opinion. She says it's effective. We never disagreed on the effective date. We were concerned about the application of the rate, when we apply it, because of the lien dates and because, again, of the language lacking the specifics to say $1 million and more. It really binds our hands. So we actually wrote a letter again to the AGs asking guidance on some of those, but we are moving forward with the intent, which is to make sure that is there. A couple other things on that real property note, it says it goes into the theft. Even though we haven't looked at the specifics, some of those properties may be Chamorro Land Trust properties that, again, may not go into the theft, that are already earmarked for CLTC. Some of them may also be, what was the other one? Oh, related to the Hagåtña redevelopment. So again, even that may conflict, that if there's $1 million property that is affected, it may also be already earmarked for Hagåtña redevelopment. Those are just some, again, the things that we look at after the law is done, or sometimes we try to get it in before it's done. But that's where we're at with that. So we're moving forward. We're trying to work out all these bugs, and we hope to hear from the AG very soon so we can get it out. Understand that the BOE has certified the roll by law. They're required to do that. So they met Monday and certified it with the old rate, but we're going to try to come in and not correct the value, but just the receivable portion that affects the taxes on that. That's where we're at with that, sir.
Okay. You know, we're all kind of surprised of what you're saying, because when we were at the budget session and we were talking about the budget, identifying the amount, being the oversight of revenue and tax, I mean, you and I never talked about this because that was something new that was on the budget. I will commit that we do need to sit down and we need to take a look at what needs to be amended so that it makes sense. Because you're right, it's not about the amount of money we're collecting, but the impact to the people of Guam. And then we got to relate that and make it come to some fairness.
Correct.
Collecting for our government operation is one thing, but doing the right thing is what we need to do. And I agree with you, but that's what you said, Mr. Pablo, is something very new to me. On that same note, I'm just concerned is that, you know, you've heard before when I brought up about real property, there appears to be a disconnect between land management and our real property section. Whenever I say you guys got the rolls, they say you guys got it wrong. I seem to have a tendency to not like that statement from land management because they seem to forget that you're the only folks that will identify what the taxes would be, not them. They have a responsibility to the government of Guam and to the people of Guam to give the listing to you, a clean listing, a listing of Chamorro Trust, a listing of where apartments are being built, because when the permit is cleared, they're notified before you even get to know about it, other than the business license part. But there are a lot of actions going on at land management that I'm almost sure you're not aware of, and you probably won't even know if somebody was given a lease and the 7 year had already expired and they should have been taxed. And there's a lot of activity that I honestly believe you guys are not in the net and should have been, and maybe we need to fix that somehow in the very near future.
Yes, I'd just like to mention, you'll be glad to hear that Department of Land Management has secured a vendor that is now working with all that upgrading, updating, and hopefully we can start moving that data into Rev and Tax and, like you said, clean data. So they just procured their vendor and they're moving forward with that.
Okay, and where are we at on the tax attorney? Did you get the individual that was in the class to come from Saipan? That's a former IRS attorney. I mean, I did ask him there at the presentation.
Thank you
Were
again
you able
for
to get
asking.
him?
Yes, thank you for asking. As a matter of fact, we've tried many attempts to try even RFI, RFP. The Attorney General has tried several times. We have tried. So it's not because of the lack of effort, but the lack of interest. So here's what we did. So we moved it further. I went and spoke to DOI to possibly get a temporary legal assistance from them, but according to them, it's a conflict of interest, so they're willing to help through grant funding. So that won't be until next year. That's one area we're looking at. The other is IRS is willing to, I just sent them the RFI recently to go ahead and put it on their network. I believe there's 3 or 4 websites that they're going to post it on. And if we can allure some retired IRS legal counsel, that'd be great. So that just went, it's ongoing, and we continue to look for legal counsel because that's one of our biggest challenges. Is that's why we always have this disconnect, because we don't have a legal counsel. We would love to move all of this along, but not only do we not have legal counsel, most of the time they're unfunded mandates, and I'm sorry I have to bring that up again, but it's really important that when you guys pass laws, please fund them, because there's several that we haven't had a chance to work with due to lack of resources, no funding. And let's take the stamp tax. Let's take that, because you did mention that. So in May, let me just read this to you, because this is what happened. May 2018, I wrote to Speaker Benjamin Cruz at the time, BJ, because he asked what was going on with the stamp tax. So on May 3rd, let me just read this real quick to you. This is in response to your request on the status of the April 10 meeting with the stakeholders that we had on the stamp tax law. The meeting was held to primarily discuss the law and its implementation. It was well attended and informative. The stakeholders had many concerns regarding the feasibility of implementing the law, considering the costs for both the government and industry vendors and how the taxes were to be calculated and paid. The following are key issues discussed. The public law did not provide funding for this mandate. And I'm going to use this word, Poe doesn't like it. It behooves me that $200,000 was funded to the AG's office, Attorney General's office, and $0 to Rev and Tax to implement and enforce this law. In addition, no authorization was given to DRT to purchase the stamps and machines along with the necessary accessories that would provide an efficient process to individually open each carton and stamp each cigarette pack. Each carton contains 10 packs of cigarettes, and there are 30 cartons in a case. DRT is currently researching the types of cigarette stamps that are available. The research revealed that the current trend is digital stamping. This process requires a specialized machine that is only available in the continental U.S. and must be special ordered. DRT is inclined to utilize digital stamping for cost effectiveness and expediency. Further, DRT is currently designing a stamp that will be affixed on each individual pack. In the meeting held with the stakeholders, certain concerns were expressed. Who purchases the machine? If it is DRT, funding must be provided for the purchase and housing of the machine and the program's operation. inclusive of staffing, maintenance, and supplies. Stakeholders prefer a centralized place that they could bring their products to a central point for stamping. Scheduling of the product to be stamped. Will stakeholders be required to hire staff to assist in the transport and stamping of the product? With the amount of products being stamped be treated as proprietary information and be kept confidential? Stakeholders are willing to purchase the machine and accessories as long as they're allowed to take tax credits. It is noteworthy that this offer was publicly stated in the bill's public hearing. There was also discussion on outsourcing the stamping process. Research conducted by DRT staff confirmed that several states outsourced this process to private companies in the U.S. Other items on logistics were discussed. So the dialogue with stakeholders and the Office of the Attorney General is continuing. In addition, the rules and regulations are currently being drafted. And I'd like to note, to this day, we are closely working with the Attorney General Office to comply with this law. In fact, they just came from a trip, October 8, I believe it was, and they met with the Attorney General of Hawaii. Because the law, the stamp tax law, mirrors Hawaii, they went out and they did the research, talked to the Attorney General, talked to the tax enforcement unit. There's a unit by itself that handles tobacco enforcement tax. So these are all researchers. We're complying as far as doing our research, due diligence, making sure we know what we want. And they also cautioned that take it slow, go slow when you're going into these contracts or vendors, because we still have to enforce and regulate. So we're doing our homework as far as what is it going to take to implement this tax law.
Is it possible that the tobacco stamp can be treated the same way alcohol is being treated? If you remember correctly, I know, Paul, you're familiar with this, and even Marie, is that when you buy alcohol, there's got to be a government label. All vendors, I'll give you a good example, all the vendors we have on Guam, when they bring the product from foreign countries, you know, like the Chivas and all the liquor, there's a requirement that they put the label on, because I know we did this for compliance. We had to go and check them. If it doesn't say the government warning, then that means you didn't, if it doesn't have it put on by the distributor, then it's taken off the shelf. It can't be sold. If it's something that's done at the factory, it's identified as something that's bought on the base. Okay? There are liquor that are sold, taken off from the base, and sold in the market, and that's not allowed by law. I know that for a fact, because we did that for the compliance when we did the ABC checks. But the distributors were required to put the label. Would that have been a benefit where, if that law was amended, that it would be the responsibility of the distributors? In order to sell that product, you got to put the label. And there's no tax credit for liquor. So there shouldn't be a tax credit for vendors to put this. They'd be responsible, because I'm almost sure that if they're buying their cigarette from the mainland, the factories can do it. It's no different as when they put the Surgeon General's warning. They can do the same thing, and all they probably be required to do is make sure that the factory advises them, this is the sequence of the tax stamp, and they need to report it to revenue tax, so revenue tax will know what to look for, and then it could be paid. I mean, I don't know if that may be another way of considering that, other than going through the agency trying to do it.
That's a good point. And you're talking about the industry where they purchase the cigarettes to stamp it before it comes here.
That's correct. They'll label it.
Yes,
it's like the Surgeon General on the pack of cigarettes. You see that.
That was discussed. However, they did look into that. The industry did look into it, but they couldn't. I'm not sure. I can't remember why, but it was not feasible to do it for Guam or international. I can't remember, but no, they did go directly to the distributor to see if they could do it, and they couldn't.
All right. Senators, do you have any questions? Please, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, the issues that you pointed out regarding that real property tax, the $1 million value, those are very valid. I'm just very surprised. This is the first time I've ever heard your concerns with the law, and I'm curious why yeah, we haven't heard that earlier, or if you have written correspondence, I'd like to see the AG's response to you earlier, because now they're saying, enforce the law, but they don't take into account how it will be enforced or anything like that. Are you saying that you've only written to the AG in the last week since their AG opinion came out?
Well, if I remember correctly, the discussions I had with the director and deputy was that I think the fiscal team had made it clear during the discussions, or had brought it up back then. Now, I wasn't a part of the public hearing or the budget hearings, but I know time and time, every time there was a proposal to include or change a tax, that we address it, because we can't be mind readers, and we hope that everything that comes out is often clean for us to administer.
No, I'm saying that the law was passed, wasn't it in September?
Absolutely.
So
our position...
Early September.
Yes, and the reason why we didn't
August
ask...
24, the bill was passed.
August.
Yeah,
August was when it lapsed into law, but...
So that's why I'm asking since then...
Our position has been, since the lien date passed, that it wouldn't take effect. And I think we've either communicated it verbally, but we've had a consensus, and only until the new OPA brought it out in the news that we weren't complying. It wasn't that we were refusing, it's that we were applying our tax administration the way we've done it in the past. Most of the legislation, for example...
But now you're talking about when you would implement it.
That's
versus
correct.
The concerns that you brought up today, which are the language is not clear with how you are going to implement it. And that's why I'm saying, why wasn't that brought up immediately in September or August when the bill was passed, so that that language could be corrected or anything in time for your new even your other implementation, your future implementation? That's what I'm curious about. I've seen nothing like that in writing, and I guess I'm going to find out if the AG gave an opinion as to the effective date. But you're telling us today that she's aware of your concerns, or she only became aware of your concerns after her opinion on the implementation date?
Yes, I guess after he issued her opinion on the effective date for what tax year basically the real property apply, and when we started to try to implement it for this for fiscal for tax year 2018. And that's when Paul looked at it and says, he came to me and basically, how are we going to apply this? Because
when was that? When?
Just after
so just recently.
So we didn't really address it, and so that's why we sent another letter the other day, just a few days, to the AG to give us guidelines as to how we're going to apply this, because it read $1 million. It didn't say at least or more than $1 million.
No, I'm saying those are very valid points, but I'm just the timing of these concerns is what I'm asking about. So now that makes sense to me. That was brought to your attention only after her opinion, and you're trying to implement it now. Okay, that I understand. Yes. Thank you. And those are valid points. And if you have them in writing, if you could submit it to us, I mean, that's the fastest way to deal with it, I would think. And even just CC us a copy of your letter to the AG, and we could take it from there, right? The other thing I wanted to ask you in regards to real property taxes, I can't remember who said this, but when we were talking about the slide and of the accounts receivable, the residual AR, but you said something on the side. You said of the 30 million in amnesty that we received, 9.7 of that was from the receivables outstanding, but 19 million of that were from non-filers of real property tax.
Not just real property tax. If you look at real property taxes, I think it only totals 1.5 million.
All right then. See, that's totally different. I thought you said 19 million from non-filers of real property, and okay. Then I heard it wrong. Okay, then that makes much more sense. All right, and okay, yeah, I just had some questions in general. And I'm sorry I couldn't catch it while you're going through the slides. There's a slide, just the category 3 status inventory master accounts receivable, and then the next slide is residual accounts receivable. So on the master accounts receivable, the active category has 89 million. But on the residual accounts receivable, your active category is 85 million. And I'm wondering, what is the difference between these two accounts?
The receivables is basically showing 155 million under the collection branch receivable, which one of the reasons why we...
Master means
yes,
collection
master,
branch?
Yes.
Okay.
And then after further review of all these receivables, you know what, when you go in and look at the receivables, yes, you tend to see that there's some of these receivables that may not be pursued or maybe in some kind of like a questionable.
Yes, yes.
So we looked at it and we say, no, this is the receivable that we really need to go after.
Okay,
And
so out
this
of the
is why-
89, only
Yeah,
85?
yeah, yes,
Okay.
85.
So these are the same money?
Same
Okay,
money.
so, and out of the 85, it may be less because of all the factors that Marie
Yes.
Benito outlined, okay? And, all right, let me just say.
I mean, if you know, there's only $1 million that we abated. Put it this way: there's only $1 million that we abated so far on the tax amnesty. If we anticipate 80% or 90% or even 100%, then you're looking at reducing it by another 26, 27, 28 million.
Yes.
So that's going to go down.
Okay, yeah, so that's my next question is on the slide where you put your total receivables, has that been adjusted for the amnesty?
The
Wait,
which one are you looking at?
yeah, hold on, let me find it. Your
On the amnesty?
AR aging summary as of 9/30/18. So there's a total here of 161 million accounts receivable over the years, of course,
you're
but
talking about the
30
aging.
million in that's 1 year old, right?
You're talking about the aging,
AR
right?
aging summary as of
Okay.
9/30/18. Yeah, so has this a table? So this table shows 30 million in accounts receivable that is 1 year old. And so this 30 million, has this been adjusted for the amnesty or not? It has? So there's still just 30, there's still 30 million that's only 1 year old.
Yes. Based on the, depending on what type of taxes, because these are cumulative of individual, corporate, withholding, and so every amount here represents 4 different taxes.
Right. But
So-
these are still valid
Yes.
after the amnesty period.
One
All of
thing-
these. So even after the amnesty, these 34 million that's 3 to 4 years old is still due?
One thing I want to make sure that I heard from my collection branch, not everything is on the amnesty. That's why we're only about 125. So if the amounts were referred to collection, in other words, for these penalties and interest to be abated, you know, basically it's in there.
It's
if it's
in
not
here.
referred, yeah, if it's not referred, it's not in there yet. That's what I was told.
And so you've only processed 125 amnesty applicants out of how many that make up the 30 million?
A little bit about 1,200, I believe.
Okay.
About 1,200 for the income tax and BPT.
All right. How long do you think that will take? So we'll know some.
You know, we wanted to finish it this, you know, by October, but you know, there's so many things that are happening. I mean, aside from the amnesty, they're also doing their part on collection on the normal collection side. So, you know, I spoke to them and said, you know, we really need to try and get this thing done. So they did an estimation that I told you earlier. Basically, half of those, basically of the 15 million taxes that collected there's probably a possibility about 70 to 80% already abatement on interest and penalties on that, meaning that we're going to probably be close to the 30 million mark
Yes.
at the end, in other words, of abating interest and penalties.
Okay, I get
So
it.
we're targeting it for this month. We try to,
And that will reduce our accounts receivable
Yes.
by approximately 30 million. One of these numbers is going to shift, or
on-
some
on
of
the-
these, right? Okay.
on the point that those receivables were referred already.
Yes,
because
all right. Okay, back to your, I know you've made repeated requests for this mandatory GRT filing, electronic filing, right? Return.
Yes.
What is, do you know, what is the Chamber's position on this? The Chamber of Commerce?
When they had the public hearing, on that, I believe there
Was
were-
there ever a bill? I don't,
Yes, we had.
oh,
a-
okay, so I'm sorry. I must
Yeah.
have, there was a hearing? Okay,
Yeah.
then I'll look it up. I'm sorry. I thought there wasn't a new bill, but my mistake. But are you able to mitigate their concerns?
Well, that's why in this last public hearing, I brought Alltech, Frank Guåhan, for any questioning on the public hearing. As far as I think, I have to say that this is probably the fourth hearing on trying to get the online mandatory for the JET. But on the previous one, I think one of the concern is security of the information that's been e-filed to the government. So in the last public hearing, we made sure that Frank Guåhan was there to answer any questions.
All right.
But I think that was, if you're talking
And do
about.
you believe then that the government is able to mitigate all the concerns that you've heard so far regarding this online mandatory?
To be honest with you, I think we have about 1/3 of the businesses filing already. We just try to get at least the 2/3 to file, in other words. So when we look at the numbers, a lot of people are using. We had this e-file for over 10 years, I believe.
I know, but you've been bringing it up. So
Yes.
1/3 obviously is not enough for you. You want the rest of the 2/3.
I mean, we can get these 4 or 5 people processing these GRT monthly returns every day. I mean, I think the total BPT file ranges from 12 to 14,000 a month. So we can get these people, rather than processing it, concentrate in other areas of the local taxes. It'll be a lot benefit, for the government. I mean, it's so, it's so simple to actually just go in there and punch the numbers in and send it. I mean,
I know, I understand, but I'm asking about the objections that have been put on the record. Are you able to say confidently now that you are able to mitigate all those objections? And you are
yes,
able,
I mean,
yes.
Frank
Like we
was
talked, I
there.
remember now at the hearing, I think I was there, that you talked about kiosks, right? In
Oh,
the
yes.
place. All of that stuff, are we ready or are we not?
I mean, the kiosk is part of our, I guess, IT improvement for many years. So it's there. We have a room there. I think there's several computers in that room. We can activate that room in a matter of days or a few days. It's just a matter of if we hear this stage and it becomes a lot. I think part of it is for us to make it available for those people to utilize.
Right. We've talked about
yeah.
that.
So
And-
we can do that. And I think Frank has mentioned that there's on the security, but maybe Paul can talk about this more on the security side, the concerns of the
Yes.
the taxpayers out there.
Right.
But I believe that the program is there for many years. It's been utilized, and I think it's been effective for all these years.
Well, maybe for me, this would help. If I've heard this very many times, and if the bill's ready, but what I would like is maybe you can send us a letter that updates your efforts in light of all the concerns that we've heard, and give us your best assurance of security. And you can even have OTEC send a letter also, or anything else, just so that we have to make a decision whether it's worth it for the government of Guam or it's not, right? It's worth it to have some business people mad at us because we're mandating that they do this, but it's worth it because it's going to, it's going to allow you to do what, you've been bringing up at all these hearings. So if you could just update
Sure.
one more time, Mr.
Just to kind of surmise what the director was saying, we do, and just like our good chair has introduced for us, we do want to promote e-filing, but absolutely we're looking at OTEC now, and they meet with us weekly. We have a representative from OTEC who meets with us, and I guess they're trying to go through their growing pains, being that they're officially a separate agency now and they don't have all the admin. But one thing we want to mention to, DRT wants to mention to the public, that when we do, and if this ever becomes law, we want to ensure the public that not only do we make it easy for them to file, but when we receive that information, we safeguard it. And we can't be the ones to answer for that. OTEC needs to answer for that to ensure that all the safeguards are there. So thank you.
Thank you.
We will follow up with them.
Okay, yes. All right, so for your compliance section, you said, and also the chairman mentioned non-licensed businesses. So I wanted to know, what is your priority, or where do you think is the biggest bang for your buck, I guess? What is it in pursuing non-licensed businesses, or licensed not reporting businesses, or licensed businesses that are under-reporting, or do you have to do all of those? And how do you prioritize that on a daily basis, I guess?
Well, most especially, or quite honestly, sometimes we've been reactionary when it comes to looking at how we go out and do enforcement. When the B&Bs came up, it required that we go out and show our presence, you know, to educate the public, to take a look at who was complying and whether or not they were meeting those requirements. But generally, when we take a look at, our administrators take a look at what kind of projects we look at what is the most bang for our dollar. So in other words, do we have the resources, and do we hit like these little businesses at the flea markets that are, you know, maybe de minimis, or do we try to educate them first? And sometimes we've gone out and we've swept the flea markets, like the senators mentioned, and we've hit the other businesses just to show that we're out there. But going back to how we want to approach things, we want to look for where the big dollars are to show the impact, and then that way it can actually trickle down to the smaller businesses.
That's what I'm hoping, yes. But where do you find that to be?
Right now, gosh, Senator, we're kind of wrapping up so many different things. We're trying to wrap up amnesty. We're looking at trying to close some CI cases that are in the pipeline, and exam cases. I can't tell you specifically where we're at unless I kind of go back to the administrators.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your help today. It's been very helpful.
If I may add,
yes.
You know, when it comes to, you know, looking at priorities and you know, the senator mentioned tax compliance, we have a lot of programs in the department that we do. I mean, we monitor all these contracts that are being awarded out here for the military contracts. We make sure that all these contractors are basically complying with the Guam law, that they're actually filing BPT, GRT, paying withholding tax, and filing, you know, their corporate income tax and paying their share. We do a lot of monitoring. We do a lot of programs. We look at, you know, unreported income, non-filers. We do a lot of projects that when it comes to non-compliance. So, you know, it's the priority. And you know, when you ask that question, are we still doing it? I mean, it was a question of whether, you know, tax amnesty, which, you know, that's the bulk of people from collection that would actually go walk the street. But when the tax amnesty came in, it just kind of like, which one do we want to look at? Because there's a lot of things that we can do, but there's a lot of programs that we even monitor the Section 30, that, you know, to ensure that the Guam gets their share of all the monies that belongs to Guam. So we do that on a daily basis, monthly basis. We do communicate with IRS on those things. So those are a lot of the big monies that we were looking at.
Okay, that's what I just was hoping to hear, that we've got some big money that we can put our best resources into, and I appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Camacho, for joining us, Ms. Benito and Mr. Pablo for continuing this dialogue with the Guam legislature. One of my primary questions has been asked and answered, and I'm very glad that we have an opportunity to hear some feedback from you and your team about real property tax and the update, but also some of the concerns that you've raised, and I'm looking forward to working with you on those. So again, I just want to reiterate what the speaker had mentioned. If you could give us those concerns in writing, that would be really helpful for us to go back in and try to address those concerns. I think that's important because, as the chair had mentioned, there's $8 to $9 million outstanding that we've already budgeted for that we really need to process and collect. Also, Ms. Benito, thank you so much for your update. I know that I have been very hard on many of you when you've come before us in previous oversight hearings about the previous fiscal year's budget and how we've set aside money for revenue officers and other folks at DRT. I hear from folks at DRT, they are overworked and undermanned, and we want to make sure that the money that the legislature has already appropriated is getting in there. So again, I want to thank you in advance for providing the full listing of hires to this committee for our review, because we understand that the additional revenue into the government will help not just at DRT but across our government and Guam agencies, and we're hearing back that we have many challenges with resources, with supplies, with support and training for our employees. So we want to make sure that the money that we've appropriated and these positions that we've identified are being filled, and that we can try to get more of those revenues in. So you mentioned 8 revenue officers, and then can you just repeat that list? 5?
You want me to go down the list?
Just real quick, yeah.
Sure, thank you. It's Revenue Officer 1, there's 8 positions filled. Revenue Agent 5. Compliance Inspector 1, 4. Compliance Inspector 2, 1. Tax Investigator 1, 2 positions. Motor Vehicle Registration Officer 4. And then the driver's license examiner is ongoing.
Great. Okay,
And
thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Can I also add that, I know these are some of our focus, but at Rev and Tax, every branch matters. So, because we all have a key in not only providing customer service and services, but for enforcement, regulation, and even at DMV, we're short-staffed everywhere. So, you provided for these positions, and I really appreciate that. We really appreciate that. But if we can, and I guess the law, the budget law allowed us, Rev and Tax, to continue hiring, and we appreciate that because we're also short of the business license that, again, monitors and makes sure that everybody's licensed. We're short in the files, central files that maintains the records and does the input. We're short at real property tax, where they monitor, how many thousands? They monitor all the properties on Guam. So everywhere in the department, we have a shortage. So if we could sit down, possibly, Mr. Chair, and look at, what we can do to help, and not only positions, not only personnel, but also resources as far as computers, desks, vehicles. These are all things that we're lacking, resources for our people to do their job. So if we can sit down and possibly find a way to fund these things right now, we need 2 vehicles. We have 1 vehicle for the whole department, and that's being used at the main office, director's office, for administrative runs, or like our messenger, our runs. But ABC needs a vehicle, Weights and Measures, Motor Weights and Measures need a vehicle. So if we can sit down and look at those and possibly identify some funding, that'd be really appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, in advance. But I want to also just note, I know that this was raised earlier, that the bill that was introduced on e-filing, that we have heard some feedback from the chamber, I think they are on board, but I think that primarily the folks that would have the most difficulty in kind of getting compliant with this new mandate would be small businesses. And so we talked a little bit about the kiosks, and you guys are pretty much prepared to have those roll out. So I just want to emphasize that we really want to get on board with that. I think it'll help you out a lot. It'll help, you know, everything to be filed more quickly. But I also just want to thank you in advance, and I guess we're always reminded that our role here really is to service the people of Guam. It's customer service. And so when they come through the doors at Revenue and Tax, regardless of what they're there for, we want to just keep that in mind and keep our customer service hats on and make sure that we are helping them and making the best use of their time and of our time. So thank you very much, Sister Masi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Any one of you can answer this. What could we anticipate as we look at the AR aging summary? What could we anticipate out of the $161 million can be in fact collected? Can we say 50% can be collected? And the reason why I ask this is because, you know, if you look at the years, you know, it's dwindled down 8, 9, over 10 years, 10 million. And, you know, and I think my colleagues and the people of Guam need to understand, after 10 years, it's almost like you can't grab the money no more. You're on a clock. And because you got 10 million that's on the 10-year, the deadline, I'm just worried that if we minus, then we're looking at 151. If it slips because of whatever activity, and I know you've identified, you know, the litigation, bankruptcy, how much could we anticipate out of this 100? I would expect the 30 million shouldn't be that hard the first year, but everything else, it's a matter of timing. It's a matter of if they don't get caught in bankruptcy, the taxpayer is still alive.
Yes.
You still can find them. There's a bunch of factors in there, and it's just so that the people of Guam and my colleagues can get a warm and fuzzy feeling that maybe 50% is in fact attainable, because, you know, we need to always remind ourselves, and the people of Guam are listening to this, is that election is next week. I hate to use this, but everybody's talking about collecting money. And everybody needs to understand, and it doesn't matter who wins. What does the department feel they can in fact anticipate in collecting? Out of the 161, I would write off already 10, because I don't know, Mr. Paul can probably tell me, and anyone of you can tell me, that you could walk back to the office and find out that out of the 10 million, 5 million got lost because you couldn't find the person or the bank. It's all tied up. So I'm only looking at 151 million. Can we get a warm and fuzzy feeling that 50 to as much as maybe 80% can be collected of this that's pending, the 161?
Yes.
What would be a rough and a safe percentage of what's collectible?
I mean, you know, what I'd like to, before we get into that question, let's look at the history of the receivable and why we, you know, there's receivables. And if you go back to that presentation that we have from FY15 to FY18, look at the receivables that we've collected every year, and the progress has continued to increase. Even if we would look at FY18 and we would take half of that out from amnesty, you know, we roughly probably collected from the normal receivable about $40 to $45 million a year. The problem with receivables, that when we look at it, we go out aggressively and collect from these receivables. The problem is the financial of these people that are actually submitting their financial statements. So it's really nice that we had this amnesty, that we collected 30 million, but at the same time, you know, we may have to give up another 30 million, you know, that could have been collected, you know, in the next, you know, 10 to 15 years if we didn't have the amnesty, but we needed the money, so we collected. When we look at the receivables, you know, and when we look at what's really active, or what's really on the residual part of that 85 million, you know, there's a certain percentage of that, you know, that we can collect moving forward, and that's something that, you know, we have to actually come up with the taxpayers, call the taxpayers. We have actually met with a lot of taxpayers that can make, they have a lot of other avenues that they can actually come in and do offer and compromise is another way of looking at it. And then we can collect as much as possible as we can. But by looking at the average receivables, we're looking at, collecting on an annual basis of 30 to 40 million, $45 million, on these receivables. If you're asking that question of the 100 and, what was that, 100 and?
That was 161.
Yeah. Because, you can't, first you have to eliminate those long-term receivables that,
Correct.
they're in time. We're gonna be receiving them for so many years. Then you only look at what's coming in, and what's coming in, you're gonna probably see part of that also that's gonna be tacked into the payment plan, because the people can't afford to come in and say, I'm gonna pay my receivable in taxes in full.
But based on your AR balance, could the department actually be, because Mr. Paul, you'll be here for a while, I know that. You ain't going anywhere yet. That 85 million that you identified, or 89 million, is something that you can be the goal. You understand where I'm coming from? Because if you look at 161,
yes,
because of all the timetables and all the factors that can fall in place, so we can actually hope for, in any administration, that 50% of your receivables is attainable. It's just a matter of timing, resources,
that's
manpower. The whole works has to fall in place.
That's what I said, 45 million. I mean, it's a revolving. That 85 million is going to continue, because as we collect, more people come in again.
Got it.
You know what I'm saying?
No, but what I'm saying is, based on this one today,
Yes.
can we honest? And I see where you come from. Every year you're going to the numbers will change.
Yes,
But
I'd
at
like to
least-
add, I understand the question, which is, are we going to collect at least 80% of this 161?
Yes.
And we are confident that, yes,
least
the answer is
50%.
yes. If you look at over 10, it's at 10 million. This is just a gauge. This aging summary is a gauge, and that's one of the priorities with the revenue officers, is this, there's a field that if you hit, the 8th year, 9th year, there's a field that says statute. Focus on this case. So we have that, as far as our program that warns them about statute. We're very cognizant of the statute. That's number one, unless we cannot help it at all, like maybe death, unlocatable. Those are the factors that will not make us the ability to collect. But over 161, I'm confident that we can collect that. So, and then the additional ROs, that also, right now, every RO has at least over 100 cases assigned to them. So
Okay,
now they can have less cases.
You might want to explain what an RO is, because my
I'm
colleagues,
sorry.
I know what it is,
I'm
but
sorry.
an RO is a collection agent, a revenue agent is the examination.
They're revenue
Different branch.
officers.
Okay.
So I think, we're pretty confident with the addition of the staff, with statutes being prioritized, and then if you just look at the over 10 years at 10 million, it's an indicator that we will collect at least 80% over the years.
Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to, you've identified resources and equipment and people. I like to ask the question, you remember we talked about it before, where we try to get land management to give you a property. You're renting,
Yes.
You're paying about $1 million a year. You're renting at that place up at former Costco. And it's evident to the people of Guam that building cannot hold revenue and tax. It's just ironic that the agency that's actually the heart of Guam is packed like sardines in a building. And I'm just curious, I just would like, and I would hope that the department would come up with a viable organizational chart that can depict exactly what we've been discussing. You say you need so many people, what are we looking at, and what is the cost, and what would be the result of the expense? What the government, if the government invests in revenue and tax, there's got to be some good profits, okay? Because it's for the people of Guam. And I just want to make sure that if you can, and then the other thing is that, do you have a program coordinator employed at the department? You know, a program coordinator is strictly a guy that, or a girl that writes grants. All they do is they look for grants, and all they do is write, because you deal with the IRS a lot, you deal with the Department of Interior, you deal with a lot of federal agencies that I'm betting they have the ability to give you grants. It's just that I don't think you guys have a program coordinator that sits down and goes maybe to Homeland Security and says, what kind of grants can we get for the criminal investigation branch? What kind of grants can you get to help the collection branch? What kind of grants can you go out to do the compliance? And the reason why I ask that is because most law enforcement have folks that write grants. If not, they have access to folks in the administration that actually comes down and says, we got a grant we can get to you. Maybe Gura, who builds fire stations and police stations, which you service everybody, can help you get a federal grant to build your building in a government land and not have to rent. I mean, that's what I've been focusing on, is I wanted to find a place where the Department of Revenue Tax can call home and actually has the ability to expand, because you remember we talked to Chamorro Land Trust, you're on 5-acre lot. You don't even have room to conduct all your road testing. When tax season comes, you have to open up satellites. If you had a big enough building, people would just flow in there and you wouldn't even notice that the place was packed. And I'm just concerned that I would like for the department to provide something to the committee so that I can work with my colleagues and see how we can help you. Because you're going to bring in the money. And if we help you get the resources to bring in the money, it'll start easing off any consideration, maybe even reconsider removing some of the taxes that have been imposed on the people of Guam. But as long as there's not enough money coming in and there's no source of revenue, we got to find one. Okay? Do any of my colleagues have any follow-up to that? No?
I guess after that I want to know, is it the building that's prohibiting you from collecting taxes? No, right? That's not really the issue for the collection. And I guess I want to know, so based on what was predicted during the budget discussions, when they did the revenue estimates, how do you see things based on our revenue estimates in general? Does it look consistent? Were the estimates consistent with what you are seeing so far? Or too early to tell? Yes? I'm sorry, can you turn on the microphone?
The first quarter, right?
Yes, so it's there early.
I didn't really see that. I didn't really look at in detail the last report, but I'm pretty sure that the projections are gonna be intact moving forward. So it's just kind of early right now.
All right.
First quarter.
All right, but nothing the opposite, right? There's no downturn that you've seen that we should be good. Okay, but that's very good to know. Thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. The committee will continue to receive testimony. Thank you, Mr. Camacho, Ms. Benito, Mr. Pablo, for being here today. Please give us the information we need, update. So I want to make sure that my colleagues are all updated where we're at. Okay? And if anyone wants to submit any testimony, please address them to the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation, and submit it via email, Senator Joe S. Agustin @gmail.com. My office is located at Rand Care Building, 2nd floor, Suite 3, 761 South Marine Corps Drive, Tamuning, Guam, 96931. Since Masi for your attendance and participation in today's oversight hearing. And for those at home, thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.